I'm Kathy with a K.
And I'm Kathy with a C.
And this is Killer Destinations.
2 young girls lost their mother at a tender age. Will justice in this small town ever be served?
Today's destination is Vidor, Texas. Located 10 miles east of Beaumont, this town of just under 10,000 residents serves as a bedroom community for nearby refineries. The community was named after Charles Shelton Vidor, who co-founded the Vidor Lumber Company, and almost all Vidor residents worked for the company. In darker days, Vidor had a well-documented history of a strong Ku Klux Klan presence. In recent years, there have been signs of progress, and the city is actively trying to overcome its past and show that it is now a welcoming place for everyone. But in 1991, the death of a local woman caused one family to look at the good old boy network in their town a little differently when their quest for justice was met with silence.
The call came into Vidor Police Department just after 4 a.m. on March 14, 1991. A teenage boy who was up early delivering newspapers was on his route when he saw a car that had crashed into a ditch. He quickly pedaled back home and let his parents know, and they called 911. When police arrived at the scene, they found a black Mercury sedan nose down in the ditch with a deceased woman sitting in the driver's seat, and she was alone in the car. At first glance, it appeared to be a tragic accident, but very quickly, questions arose. The outside of the car had barely any damage, certainly nothing that indicated the vehicle went into the ditch at a fast speed. The dead woman had no noticeable wounds. Her purse was sitting upright on the passenger seat. Her feet were against the seat rather than stretched out toward the pedals. And she wasn't wearing a seatbelt, but crashing nose first into the ditch had not thrown her forward. There were soft drinks on the console that had not even been spilled. It was plain to see that this was a staged event and not an accident. But why and by whom? The woman behind the wheel was identified as 34-year-old Kathy Page, a young wife and mother. Kathy and Steve Page had been married for almost 13 years and had 2 beautiful daughters, Erin, age 11, and Monica, age 7. At the time of her death, Kathy worked as a waitress at a local restaurant, and she and her husband Steve were good friends with several of the police officers and detectives who worked for the Vidor PD. In fact, the first detective on scene, Detective Sergeant Ray Mosley, knew both of them well and had known Steve for almost his entire life. As a result, he also knew that the ditch the car was in was just 100 yards from their home, and it was facing away from their house, so it looked like the accident happened as Kathy was trying to drive away from home. Detective Mosley and other officers investigated the car further, and they found blood on the back of Kathy's head and on the driver's side headrest. But no other blood was visible at the scene. Her nose had been broken, and marks on her neck led officers to believe that Kathy had possibly been strangled. During closer inspection of Kathy's body, Detective Mosley found transfer blood on the inside of her clothing, which was an indication that her clothes were put on after injury was inflicted. A blade of grass on the back of her jeans indicated the body had been dragged, and Kathy was not wearing any makeup, jewelry, or her wedding band.
EMTs at the scene removed Kathy's body and placed it in an ambulance for transport to the hospital. Forensic techs had the car towed to the station, and Detective Mosley and Lieutenant Carter went to the Page residence. When they knocked on the door, Steve answered wearing only boxers, and it was at that time that Lieutenant Carter broke the news that Kathy had been strangled to death. Steve began crying and fell down on the couch, inconsolable and sobbing. When Steve was finally able to compose himself, he called Kathy's parents, James and Dorothy Fulton, to tell them what happened. Mr. and Mrs. Fulton only lived a few minutes away, so they headed straight to the Page house. And Mrs. Fulton, Kathy especially, wanted to make sure that they were there when Kathy's daughters woke up. When the Fultons arrived, Steve told them that Kathy had been out drinking with friends the night before and that Kathy had driven off into the ditch and possibly broken her neck. Around 7 a.m., police at the scene came back to the house and asked Steve if they could come in and talk to him. But he refused to let them in despite Mr. Fulton's attempt to convince him. Steve told his father-in-law that he knew the police department had planted stuff on some of his friends before, and he wasn't going to take any chances. So, while they stood on the porch, police informed Steve that the medical examiner would perform an autopsy to determine exactly how Kathy died. Well, now at this point, Steve actually refused and said he didn't want anyone cutting up his wife. However, they did it anyway after Mr. Fulton gave them the okay. Now, Kath, I'm not sure how this works. I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast. But this was in the court records.
I don't know what to think about it either, because if there's a suspicious murder, they're going to do something.
That's what I thought. I didn't know that they would need permission unless there was a religious exemption.
Maybe the coroner just wanted someone from the family to say, Go ahead. I don't know. But it is interesting the way the court records wrote it up pretty much just like this.
Exactly. It said Mr. Fulton and then in quotes, authorized it. But anyways, despite Steve's reticence about having them in the house or Kathy having the autopsy, he did agree to go to the station that afternoon to speak with Detective Mosley. During his interview with Detective Mosley, Steve disclosed that he and Kathy had drifted apart. He said Kathy explained to him that she was uncomfortable with who she was at that time in her life, and she wanted space and time to find out kind of where she was going and who she wanted to be. So the two of them agreed that they'd spend time together as a family, but Steve would find an apartment nearby for a few months so Kathy could work on herself. He actually was able to find an apartment relatively quickly, and so he had moved his belongings into the apartment a week before Kathy's death, and he began living there. Steve said on the day Kathy was killed, he went to the house that morning to help get the kids ready for school, and then he took them to school. He made some business calls before returning to the house sometime before noon. That afternoon, Steve and Kathy spent some time together. They washed the car, and then they separately went to the ballpark because each of their girls had baseball games. Kathy was with younger daughter Monica, and Steve was with older daughter Erin, and so as soon as Monica's game ended, Kathy took Monica home. Steve stayed at the ballpark with Erin until her game ended, which was around 9 o'clock at night, and they got home about a half an hour later or so. Steve said that after dropping Erin off, he went back to his apartment at around 10 o'clock at night. Steve told Detective Mosley, that Kathy called him a few minutes after he left and said, "Hey, I just got a call from a friend of mine. She's about to get off work and she wanted me to go out for drinks with her. Can you come back over and watch the kids until I get home?" And he said, "Sure," and toddled back over to the house.
Right.
Now, what he said to Detective Mosley was that when he arrived at the house, Kathy had just gotten out of the shower and was wrapped in a towel. So he took that opportunity to proposition her for sex, and she agreed, and they had sex on the carpet in the living room. After that, Kathy left the house to meet her friend in Beaumont around 11:30 p.m.
The day after Kathy was killed, daughters Erin and Monica were subpoenaed to appear before the grand jury the following day.
Can you subpoena an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old?
Apparently you can.
Okay. Good point. I'm just really surprised
That's what
at their
they did.
age.
Yeah, but
You can't compel them to talk.
Well,
how would that happen? We're going to put you in jail or juvie until you do?
No. You can't compel anyone to talk, to be honest with you.
You can give them candy.
Yeah, exactly. But really, the age of reason in California is 8. And
wow,
people assume that by the age of 8, you know the difference between right and wrong. So what happens when you have a minor on the stand? You quiz them on that. Do you know the difference between a truth and a lie? So if I'm, 40 years old and I tell you I'm 25, is that truthful or is that a lie?
Like an 8-year-old would never know, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly.
She'd be like, "You're 80. You're neither of those."
Exactly. You're neither of those. So you can be subpoenaed and you have the capacity to testify in front of a grand jury. But what shocked me about this is 2 days after their mother's death.
I can't imagine being separated from my mom and my sister and anybody I knew or felt comfortable with being in a room with adults who are all very serious and staid and are trying to get me to answer things about my mom and dad.
But this tells me that somebody was working behind the scenes trying to get answers immediately.
That's a good point.
Anyway, Steve also received a subpoena, and that was the first time he made a call to an attorney. It turns out that detectives had been busy. During their investigation, they learned that Kathy did not meet a girlfriend for drinks, but instead spent the night with a new boyfriend. So Kathy's boyfriend went to the police station and gave them a statement and told them he, in fact, had met Kathy at a hotel in Beaumont sometime before midnight, just hours before she was killed. He said they had sex and described what she was wearing when she left. Now, these were the exact same clothes the police found her with in her vehicle later that night. But she was missing socks, her jewelry, her watch, her makeup, her wedding ring, all that stuff. The boyfriend also agreed to a polygraph, which he passed. Now, the autopsy showed that Kathy had in fact been strangled and her nose had been broken. There were bloodstains on her underwear and skin, and this confirmed what police already suspected, that Kathy Page was not killed in her vehicle. She was killed at another location. She was cleaned up, redressed, and placed in the back of her vehicle before it was pushed into a ditch where she was found. According to the autopsy report, Kathy Page's cause of death was asphyxia due to strangulation, and it was done by hand. And the autopsy report confirmed that Kathy did have sex on the night she died. However, the report included one critical detail, that Kathy's sex partner had had a vasectomy. Now, the boyfriend had not had a vasectomy. This confirms Steve's statement that he actually did have sex with Kathy because he had had a vasectomy several months earlier. In 1991, in Vidor, Texas, it was not customary to send the sample away for any kind of DNA analysis. So that was not done in this situation.
But it still doesn't explain why, if she had sex with two men, there was only a sample from one.
My guess, and I'm just a gambling woman, is that he was wearing protection. That's my only guess. And that the husband was not.
Now, Steve Page had a theory about the identity of his wife's killer. He said that he'd received threats on the phone that the same thing that happened to Kathy would happen to him. He was being very cryptic when he said there was a certain person in Beaumont from a very prominent family that he thought might have been involved. These folks were Italian, and they were thought to be part of the Beaumont Mafia. I'm not sure how big Beaumont is, but I'm not sure why they'd have a mafia.
I don't either. So, how far is Beaumont from Vidor?
About 10 miles.
Okay.
Which I said in the beginning.
Did you? Okay, well, obviously I wasn't
in today's destination.
Paying attention.
It's fairly close, but it's also a fairly small town. I mean, it's obviously not a Houston or Dallas, but I didn't realize they had a mafia.
I wonder if it's a mafia hotspot and we just don't know it.
La Casa Nostra, baby.
Like La Casa Nostra.
Baby. They say baby to everything. At least in my mind, they do. But Kathy's family wasn't buying any of this. She was from a really large, tight-knit family. Her parents lived just a few miles away in a city called Rose City. They'd been married for more than 50 years. She was one of 6 siblings and had a few sisters and a couple of brothers, and she was very, very close with all of them, especially her sisters. And it was her sister Sherry that came out and said there was no way that what Steve said about having sex before Kathy went out was true. Sherry said that Kathy had told her that the romance in their marriage had gone away a long time ago, and Steve was actually sleeping on the couch. She also said that she knew her sister, and there was no way that her sister would have sex with her husband right before she was planning to leave and go have sex with somebody else. Sherry also said, and this is a little convoluted, so let me see if I can make this easier. Sherry also said she spoke with one of Steve's sisters-in-law, so a woman who was married to one of Steve's brothers. And Sherry said that based on this conversation, there was only one possible scenario for what happened to Kathy. Apparently, the sister-in-law told Sherry that in the early morning hours before Kathy was found, Steve had made 2 phone calls. One was to a friend of Kathy's, the one she was supposed to be going out with. This is around 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning. And Steve called this friend, and when she answered the phone, Steve hung up. Then he called a second number he had. Don't know how he got these numbers, but according to the sister-in-law, he called the second number, and when the person on the other line answered, they said, blah, 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 hotel in Beaumont, and Steve then also hung up the phone. In his mind, it was, she lied about going out with her friend because her friend's home, so why isn't Kathy? And if she had a hotel that she's been calling, clearly she's hooking up with some dude.
Do you have any idea how the sister-in-law knew this information?
None at all.
Okay.
All of this is coming from court records. It doesn't go into the salacious details as much, which they really should. As an attorney, if you can affect this in any way, that would be fantastic.
Exactly. I need to write the opinions.
Exactly. Ooh, that would be good. Now, Kathy, it was actually Kathy's father, James Fulton, and this breaks my heart that he actually had this thought, but he said that he believed that when Kathy came home from meeting this other gentleman in Beaumont, Steve confronted her and it became physical. He said Kathy probably came home that night, went into the house, and found Steve asleep in the front room. Remember, he didn't live there. He was staying in an apartment, so he had just fallen asleep waiting for her. So she went into the bedroom, changed into her pajamas, and went through her nightly routine. She took her makeup off, then she took her jewelry off, and at some point, Steve woke up. So Mr. Fulton believed that Steve then went into the bathroom, got into a fight with her, and demanded sex. Kathy's family believed the fight escalated because she said no to Steve about having sex with him, and then he got angry and proceeded to rape her and killed his daughter, strangled her, while he was raping her. But despite the grand jury being impaneled, no charges were filed. However, according to the Vidor police, Steve Page remained their only person of interest.
So, Kathy, this is interesting because if the testimony at the grand jury, and of course we do not know what it is because it's a secretive proceeding, but if the testimony at the grand jury added up to everything we know right now, I'm shocked that it didn't draw charges then.
Well, and especially because, as we've said, and we will continue to say, you can indict a ham sandwich. Because you can. And so
it's very easy.
It is. And I don't understand, even though clearly what they have is circumstantial, why didn't that happen?
And you can convict on circumstantial evidence.
Exactly.
It's just the strength of the evidence is the issue. So fast forward almost 3 years to April 1994, and Steve Page was indicted by a grand jury, but not for murdering his wife, but on charges of desecrating a venerated object, his murdered wife's grave. According to an article in the Orange Leader newspaper, Kathy's family hired a private detective who videotaped a man kicking over a vase of flowers and scattering them all over. It was a felony charge which could result in up to 10 years in prison. And it was revealed at this time that Kathy's father had filed 2 civil lawsuits against Steve. One was brought to block him from collecting Kathy's life insurance because Mr. Fulton alleged that Steve willfully brought about the death of Kathy by strangling her. And honestly, this is like a provision in a lot of life insurance policies that if you do that, you can't collect. And even though he was not charged with the crime, everyone knew he killed her and therefore should not profit by it. So Mr. Fulton was seeking to have the money awarded to his 2 granddaughters, Kathy and Steve's daughters, Erin and Monica. Mr. Fulton said it was frustrating because he was sure Steve had strangled his daughter and the police weren't doing their job. He even said that since so many members of the police department knew Steve, they were purposely stymieing the investigation. Now, Kath, as a side note, the population of this town is 10,000. They averaged 1 murder a year. The department had 3 detectives, which is actually shocking. So I'm just wondering if Monday through Friday they work patrol, you know, but
and Saturdays they worked at the jail.
Yeah, exactly. But they said they sought the help of the Texas Rangers and county investigators, but there were still no solid leads uncovered or directly connecting Steve to his wife's murder. the case remains simply circumstantial. In the second civil suit that was filed by Mr. Fulton, he and his wife were seeking custody of the girls, Erin and Monica. Now, sadly, they'd had no contact with their granddaughters because their granddaughters lived with the father, and Steve wouldn't let them have a relationship because of the accusations of murder, which I get. The dad's in charge and he has the say.
And why would you want your daughters exposed to that?
Why would you want your daughters poisoned against you?
Right. 10 weeks after Kathy's death, her dad had begun running small advertisement in Vidor's weekly newspaper. And each ad featured a photograph of Kathy, a notation of how long it had been since her murder, and a jab at local officials for not being able to solve the case. But 3 years later, so again, we're in 1994 after these civil cases had been filed, the weekly ads continued, but now Mr. Fulton upped his game. He paid for a billboard on Interstate 10 going east so that everyone who entered Vidor saw it as they drove into town. The billboard said, "Brutally murdered May 14th, 1991. Kathy Fulton Page. No search warrants, no arrests. It's time for a change. Welcome to Vidor."
Can you imagine coming in, reading those billboards? It's like, wait, what?
I appreciate the fact that he was clearly in a lot of pain, but still had the humor to put that "Welcome to Vidor" in.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, it wasn't just these billboards that he started doing around this time. He also put up 10 4x8 feet red, white, and yellow signs along the highway just east of Beaumont. Now, Kath, these 10 signs were all in a row, and apparently they mimicked a well-known shaving cream ad for Burma Shave, that actually ran for 40 years until the 1960s. Apparently at the time, these 10 ads, they all rhymed and were kind of like a humorous way to advertise the shaving cream. No idea what they said. Probably could have looked it up. I didn't.
Nor did I.
But in the case of Mr. Fulton's signs, the 10 signs in a row read, "Help. Outside investigation needed to catch murderer and accomplices. Happened May 14th, 1991. Kathy Page brutally murdered. Raped while dying. Vidor police botched up the case, waiting for confession. This could happen to you." Which just breaks my heart that a dad would have to say any of that, but especially raped while dying, about his daughter.
Because you can't ever get that out of your brain.
Exactly.
No matter what. And the simple fact is, it could happen. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
They were just regular people.
In an August 1994 article in the Orange Leader by Lori D. Haynes, it was reported that police finally executed a search warrant on the Page house to take DNA samples. This is about 3.5 years after Kathy Page was killed. Now, being 3 years after the crime, they were hoping to find evidence of Kathy's blood on the living room carpet and the linoleum in the hallway. And Kath, by this time, as you had said, in 1991, they didn't routinely take DNA samples, but by this time they did. Police had never issued a search warrant for the Page house at the time of Kathy's murder. The fiber samples they collected were sent to the FBI laboratory for analysis, but it came up empty.
So Kath and I talked about this, and
we debated it in a scholarly fashion over Chick-fil-A sandwiches and Prosecco.
Because I ate the French fries before I got here.
I wasn't going to say that.
I literally told her, I saved you the calories.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so it's like they're looking for DNA. So what they do is they take carpet samples and they took linoleum samples, and they're trying to see, did Steve tell us the truth? Did he have sex with his wife on the living room floor? Or was Kathy's blood on the living room floor? Or when I'm saying floor, I meant rug.
Right.
But,
or you meant carpet.
You know, thank you. But was her blood there, or was there any evidence of, intercourse there? What's the deal?
But even like you said, just because there was blood there or semen there didn't mean that it didn't happen just like he said.
Correct. It's difficult because it's her home and it's her husband. Even though they're separated, it's her husband.
Right.
But anyway, of course, these 3 years later, they again took samples of various things in the house, but there was no DNA on them. But it also leads me to wonder if the sample taken by the coroner was ever preserved.
I agree. Now, it doesn't mean they didn't, but in the court records and everything else I read, and I'm sure the same thing with what you read, it didn't say what happened and whether or not that was part of what they sent to the FBI in 1994.
I agree, but I don't think it was.
I don't think it was either. I feel like if it was, it would have been mentioned.
Right, specifically in the court records. But they're trying to find evidence that Steve is lying. How do you find evidence that Steve is lying? You find evidence of murder where he said they were having marital relations.
The other thing, too, that was said is that 3 years later, in 1994, apparently there was a fire lit under their butts because everybody was aware that Steve and his daughters were moving out of state. So he was selling the house. And truly, in the mid-90s, if I've got linoleum, I'm taking that out as soon as I buy the new house.
Right. The evidence was definitely going to go away if it was there at all.
As it should have been.
Right. So now, even though Steve Page hadn't been arrested for his wife Kathy's murder, the civil suit his former father-in-law filed meant that he had to sit under oath for deposition. And police, family, friends, and neighbors would all be called to testify as to the facts that they knew about the Page marriage and the night Kathy was killed. Okay, so this is the civil case to prevent Steve from inheriting Kathy's $50,000 life insurance, and it went to trial in June of 1995. And a lot of circumstantial evidence came out against Steve, some of which we've already discussed. Kathy's family members testified to various statements made by Steve to them individually about how Kathy died, which were all variations on the same theme. His big theme, though, she was out drinking or using drugs and ran off the road and broke her neck. And that's just what he was telling everybody. Anyway, he also told some of them that at various times, he hoped they never found Kathy's murderer. So Kathy's friends and family testified to the details they knew about their relationship and what happened in the days leading up and following her murder. But Steve denied everything in his deposition. For example, Kath, there was testimony that in the early morning of the murder, like 6 a.m., he was doing laundry in her house. But he was like, no, I wasn't. And there was also a relative who testified that he had his carpet cleaned professionally with one of those equipment type deals that you got to rent. And he said, no, I actually own professional carpet cleaning equipment.
Which is kind of funny.
I know. And I was cleaning up fish grease off the carpet. So a next door neighbor testified that she heard a loud argument between the couple the day before Kathy was found dead in her car and heard them argue several times before. Another neighbor reportedly saw Steve burning some sort of fabric in his backyard either the day of or the day after the funeral. Detective Mosley testified that Steve never asked to see Kathy's body, nor were police allowed inside the Page home on the day of the murder. And they never got a search warrant until 1994 when they went in to get possible DNA samples. And here's the thing. If you're a detective testifying, and if there's any inkling that you're looking at this guy and you're thinking he's the one, the obvious question is, how come you didn't search the residence?
Right.
And you have to live with that, you know? Anyway, Detective Mosley testified that Steve remained the number one suspect in the murder, but he had been no-billed twice by the grand jury.
Which, again, shocks me.
Shocks me.
Like, who was on this grand jury? All of his family members?
But what else was said behind closed doors that we don't know? I mean, the fact that 2 grand juries didn't return anything.
Were there cash payments?
Could have been. That's a speculation warning.
He knows the mob.
It's true.
He might not know them personally, but he knows of them.
He
knows where to find them.
They're 10 miles away, apparently. But one person's testimony brought an end to the trial. Kathy's sister Sherry testified, and she had specifically been warned, you're not allowed to testify that you asked Steve to take a polygraph and he refused. Okay, but Sherry took the stand and brought it up. The defense immediately objected, and the judge was like, mistrial, boom. So, Kath, before a mistrial was declared, because Sherry specifically disobeyed a court order,
which is stupid.
Which is going to happen. A mistrial will be declared, and the judge, he'll be upset that he had to do it, but he'll do it. Or she'll do it if it's Judge Julianne.
Julianne, we love you. You're the best judge ever. And not just because you got Kathy off on that murder case.
But I'm wondering if Sherry felt like she was going to throw it out there anyway, because Steve's relatives were also testifying in his favor, and they were supporting him. And the police had come up with the belief, or the coroner, that it was a left-handed person who strangled Sherry, and all of his relatives were like, he's right-handed, even though some people said, no, he writes with his left hand, like that was a kerfuffle. But the point is, I'm wondering if Sherry felt like, wow, this isn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. But it's interesting that his family was taking the stand in support of him.
Right. Now, this same exact civil case went to trial 5 months later. We're now in November of 1995. And this trial lasted long enough, Kath, for Steve to take the stand. No Sherry getting in there and yapping about polygraph tests.
Right.
He testified that he loved his wife and did not kill her. And even though desecrating his wife's grave was a criminal trial scheduled for a later date, Kath, he actually brought up the issue while he was on the stand. He actually admitted that he was kicking the flowers on the grave because he was angry at the Fultons who were harassing him about killing his wife. Steve said on the stand, "We made the grave our battlefield. I told them they couldn't put flowers there, but they kept putting them there anyway, and I removed them." After 4 days of testimony, the judge again declared a mistrial. But this wasn't because of Sherry. It was because the jurors announced that they were at a stalemate and could not go further. So, Kath, in Texas, I read that of the 12-member jury, in a civil trial, you need a 10-2 vote in favor of the plaintiff for them to prevail. When they declared the mistrial, it was 6-5-1, and the one couldn't come up with an answer at all. 6 months later, in August of 96, Steve Page actually entered a plea of no contest to the charge of desecrating his wife's grave, and he was given 3 years probation with a deferred adjudication, meaning as long as he stayed on the straight and narrow, he wouldn't have to go back to trial, and a fine of $500.
In October of 1999, now this is more than 3 years after the second trial, a jury was seated for the third time in the same civil matter regarding Kathy's life insurance policy. And just as a side note, the life insurance carrier wants the judge to tell them what to do. They're not going to release the policy no matter what, because they know that if they give $50K over here to somebody who didn't deserve it, they're out of luck there and they got to issue it elsewhere. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So they're invested in this as well, only to the extent they want to know who to give it to. So for this time, this third trial, Steve and Kathy's daughter, Erin, who is now 20 years old and married, took the stand. She was 11 when her mother was killed, and Erin told jurors she didn't remember much about the night of her mother's death, but she remembered her mom telling her and her little sister Monica that their father was going to watch them that night while she went out. The next thing she remembered was being awakened the next morning and being told that her mother was dead. She also testified that she never heard her parents argue and never saw her father sleep on the couch. She said when she woke up, her father was there, he had a tissue, and he was crying. Her testimony was very important because, first of all, she's a first-hand observer as to what was happening in the house, and presumably she's old enough to have a memory about it, and it contradicted the plaintiff's witnesses who said the couple argued and that Steve never cried after he was told about his wife's death. During her testimony, Erin referred to her mother's side of the family as Mr. and Mrs., using their formal titles. Like she wasn't saying grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, none of that. Now, it's been 9 years since she'd seen any of them, so her using Mr. and Mrs. was totally understandable. She testified that she had no relationship with that side of the family because of their attempts to prosecute her father.
And this is something we had talked about also, is that, of course, it's going to resonate with the kids that they just lost their mother and now somebody's trying to take their father away.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I can't imagine the fear that was in their minds every single time their dad told them. And their dad was bitching to them about it.
Right.
But I can't imagine the fear that it imparted into them every time he said it.
For sure. I agree with you 100%. So 5 days later, and 7 years after James Fulton filed suit against Steve Page, The civil jury found by an 11-1 vote that the evidence presented in the trial showed that Steve Page was responsible for his wife's death.
That's crazy. And
I know.
You know who we're all thinking about right now, right? The juice is loose. OJ. But it's true. He was found not guilty, but was found guilty in the civil trial, but was found, what do you call it? In the civil trial.
Liable.
In the civil trial by a preponderance of the evidence. Obviously, much different standards of burden of proof, right? It's instead of beyond a reasonable doubt, it's by a preponderance of the evidence.
It's literally
correct?
like 50+%, like 51%. Yeah, exactly.
Versus like 90.
Like, does the evidence preponderate in favor? A significantly lower burden. Anyway, so the jury awarded $50,000 from a life insurance policy to the Page's youngest daughter, Monica, who was then 15. The jury also awarded $150,000 to Kathy's parents. But for James Fulton, his quest to have his daughter's murder resolved was still not over. He wanted Steve to be tried in criminal court for the murder and basically said, I've waited 8.5 years and my daughter was raped while she was being murdered. I think it's about time the police do something. Steve Page said outside the courtroom that he knew he didn't do it, and he knew the facts clearly showed he didn't do it. And he was quoted as saying, apparently the distortions that the Fultons were able to deliver carried more weight. When asked if he was going to appeal the verdict, he said, nope. It's over for me. But he did appeal and lost.
He did. He appealed actually that same year.
Yeah. I'm sure his lawyer's like, by the way, you're appealing.
Exactly.
So even after the civil court victory, James Fulton had a new billboard based on his strongly held belief that it was a buddy deal, that the policemen were friends of his former son-in-law and they allowed Steve Page to get away with murder. This was reflected in one of the billboards he put up after the civil case that said, quote, the buddy system used in Vidor. This is Orange County, city of Vidor, where you can get away with brutally murdering a woman.
Fast forward 18 years. In 2017, the film 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri hit theaters, and in interviews, the writer said he drew inspiration to write this fictional storyline from the signs that James Fulton had posted along Interstate 10. They had such an emotional heft that the writer of that movie remembered them years later. And Kath, actually, I haven't seen the movie and I want to actually after reading some of the things I was reading, but 2 of the actors in the film actually also went on to win Oscars.
Because of this film?
From this film.
Okay,
right.
We have to see this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And while the movie reinvigorated interest in the case in 2017, a true crime TV series called Cold Justice also took an interest. And I love this TV series. I really do. It's super interesting. The host of the show is a woman named Kelly Siegler, and she was a legendary former prosecutor for Harris County, and this is the county in which Houston is in. And she does the show where she goes into different areas where there's a cold case and she reviews details of the case to see if all this time later, she and some of her experts can find who the person really was, right? Like you're looking at it from a different point of view. There are new techniques you can use. Time loosens lips and whatnot. And so
time totally loosens lips.
It does. And so in 2017 now, so we're more than 25 years after the murder occurred, they were hoping that people would start saying what they knew. So she and her team reviewed details of how the responding officer believed the car accident was staged, how the family home was not immediately searched, and how the autopsy report indicated that Kathy Page was strangled. In the episode, Kath, the host said, somewhere along the way, the system failed this case, Kathy's family, and justice. But now with a new police chief in Vidor, there was hope they could finally get the case solved. Now, Kathy, what was most interesting is that after this movie and the TV show, Kathy's daughter, Erin, who testified for her father at the 3rd civil trial, right, because she was 20 at the time, she felt ready to be more involved in the case, not only as the daughter of the suspect, but also the daughter of the victim. In December 2018, Erin was then a software developer and a mother of 2, and she sat down with Houston Chronicle journalist Emily Foxhall. Erin spoke about her mom and said her mom really wanted to be an inventor and that she was super crafty. She could come up with all sorts of really cool things. And she recalled that her mother watched infomercials all the time and would exclaim, "I had that idea."
Okay, that cracked me up when I heard it. You know what I mean? Because it's like, that's such a human reaction.
It
like,
totally
oh my
is.
gosh.
If only I'd done that first.
Exactly. I had that idea. Why didn't I do anything with it? Yeah.
Exactly. We could be billionaires. But Erin said she realized she didn't want her mom's legacy to be a billboard about her murder. In the article, Erin said she'd gone to Vidor to talk to the new police chief and the district attorney's office about who may have killed her mother. She said she was afraid that her mom might have been killed at home while she and her sister Monica slept, and that the killer arranged things to make it appear that she had died in a car crash, which of course is exactly what the Fultons had been saying. Erin said it took time and therapy before she was able to consider the possibility that her dad may have been responsible. And Kath, Erin's younger sister Monica died in 2011 at the age of 27 from a drug overdose. And Erin said it was at her sister's memorial service that she felt like she saw who her dad was for the very first time. She did not go into details in this article. I don't know if it was how he acted, what he said, any of that, but her eyes had kind of had blinders on them until then, and that made her start realizing, I don't actually know what really happened.
Erin remembered the shock she felt in the weeks after her mother's death. She said that her family stayed in Vidor for 3 years until her dad took both girls to live with his sister in Tennessee.
And he moved to Huntsville, Alabama,
where he remarried and didn't bring his girls to live with him.
Correct.
So naturally, Erin's relationship with her father worsened, and she had no maternal grandfather because of all the billboards that he put up after the crime upset her. And despite the fact that a civil jury found by a preponderance of the evidence that her father had killed her mother, there was no criminal case. There was no evidence there.
And Kath, one of the things I saw said that the camera that was used at the scene to take photos on the night Kathy was murdered, the camera malfunctioned, so they had no photos, which actually sounds a little convenient to me.
Did they have no crime scene photos?
No crime scene photos.
That's brutal.
Back then, you open up the camera and you ruin everything. So
right, but I mean,
if you're looking at them suspiciously, that's suspicious.
Okay, but at the same time,
I agree.
It's film camera.
No, I agree 100%.
Like sometimes that,
you can look at it both ways.
Yeah, exactly.
But for the people who want there to be a conspiracy, you can see how that could be made into one. For the people who believe it's actually happened, you got that too.
Right. Again, I fall back on the fact that they were all dragged before a grand jury fairly quickly.
I go back to the fact that 2 grand juries didn't indict him.
Right.
Like that to me says something's hinky.
Like, what's up?
Yep.
Well, I don't know if hinky, like, what do you mean hinky? I feel like I might not have all the evidence then.
I feel like it was manipulated.
Like a good old boy network thing?
Something.
So during this interview with the Houston Chronicle, Erin and the journalist visited what Erin described as the saddest place on earth for her, the graves of her mother and sister. But she had reason for hope that the case would move forward and she'd finally get answers to her family's mystery.
But Kathy, it doesn't look as of now like Erin will get the answers she wants. Because when she was there in 2018 and she spoke to the police chief in Vidor, he told her that they'd made some progress on the case and had sent the file over to the district attorney's office for consideration about whether they had enough to charge Steve Page. In 2021, the police chief was again in the newspaper, not talking to Erin this time, but he also made the comment they had some more information and they'd sent it over to the district attorney's office, who was looking into whether or not they had enough to prosecute. That same comment was made 3 years later in 2024, but to date, no prosecution has been undertaken.
The murder of Kathy Page has never been solved. Police consider Steve Page to be the only person of interest. Crime Stoppers of Southeast Texas is offering a $50,000 reward in the case, and it's the largest reward ever offered by Crime Stoppers in this area. Kathy's mother died back in 2007 at the age of 73, with the hope that her daughter's killer would be brought to justice. James Fulton, Kathy's dad, died just 2 months ago in September of 2025 at the age of 94. He remained committed to finding his daughter's killer till the very end.
All right, folks, I'm daring to say this, and I really hope I don't screw this up.
Oh, boy.
I'm hoping to have a merch page up.
Oh,
within the next 2 weeks. So like a week after you guys listen to this. So we'll remind you guys again, if there's anything Killer Destinations you want for Christmas, if you have other Killer Destination fans you want to buy for, if you want to tell your family to buy for it, we're hoping to have things. We'll have, I mean, it's not going to be a huge selection.
It's going to be
t-shirts and phone cases and
stuff you expect. However,
yes,
if you have any interest in getting anything in particular on our merch page, hit us up.
Thank you for listening. We love you guys. Patreon 7-day trial for free at the $10 level.
You know what we keep doing? We keep forgetting to tell people it's on our Patreon.
Oh.
One of these days we'll have to do that.
Okay, not this time. We'll tell you next week. You'll
okay,
have to
bye.
listen.